She walked into the studio expecting applause, admiration, and a controlled narrative. He was waiting with jokes, smiles, and questions she did not prepare for. At first, it sounded like comedy. By the end, it would feel like a courtroom, and unlike every other stage she had ever stood on, this one would not belong to her. The lights of the Gutfeld studio flashed in sharp blues and whites as the band wrapped up a fast, playful intro. The audience clapped on cue, the kind of applause that came automatically in a late-night studio, polite, energetic, programmed. Greg Gutfeld leaned back in his chair, glasses low on his nose, a half-smile already waiting on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in that unmistakably casual, teasing tone, "tonight's guest has been an actress, a duchess, a cultural lightning rod, a documentary star, and apparently, the most misunderstood human being on Earth." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. "Please welcome Meghan Markle." Applause swelled as Meghan stepped onto the stage. She wore a sleeveless ivory high-neck top, perfectly fitted, paired with a soft brown suede skirt and tall leather boots. Her hair was pulled back into a tight, elegant low bun, exposing her face completely. Her posture was straight, chin slightly lifted in quiet confidence. She gave a single, measured wave, then moved toward Greg with the calm assurance of someone deeply accustomed to being the center of the frame. Greg stood to greet her. "Meghan," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to chaos." She shook it briefly. "I'm sure I'll survive," she replied coolly. The line drew a few laughs, but there was already a faint edge in it, subtle but present. They both sat. The applause faded. The studio settled. Greg adjusted a paper on his desk. "So," he said lightly, "how does it feel to be the most analyzed woman on the internet who never asked for attention, but somehow keeps finding it?" The audience laughed. Meghan smiled politely, but the muscles in her jaw tightened just a fraction. "I think it says more about the internet than it does about me," she replied. Greg nodded. "That's a very diplomatic answer." "I try to stay above noise," she said calmly, "not inside it." Greg raised an eyebrow. "Interesting place to say that, from a television studio." Laughter again. Meghan's smile thinned. She crossed one leg over the other. "Visibility doesn't mean obsession," she said. "True," Greg replied, "but obsession does require visibility." Meghan let out a soft, almost amused breath. "You're very confident in your assumptions." "I'm a talk show host," he said. "It's literally in the job description." The audience laughed. Meghan gave a brief nod, the kind that said, "I'm tolerating this." Greg leaned forward slightly. "Let's keep it light for a moment. You've lived in Britain, Canada, America. If you had to pick one place that truly felt like home, where would it be?" Meghan didn't hesitate. "Home is where I'm respected," she said. Greg tilted his head. "So, not a geographical answer." "It's a personal one," she replied. Greg smiled. "Personal answers are my favorite kind. They usually come with footnotes later." More laughter. Meghan's eyes narrowed just a touch. "You're enjoying this," she said lightly. "I enjoy curiosity," Greg replied. "It keeps the lights on." Meghan glanced briefly at the audience, then back at him. "Curiosity can also be invasive." "So can fame," Greg said. "Yet here we both are." That landed closer than she liked. A faint murmur moved through the crowd. Greg shifted to another card. "You've spoken a lot about reclaiming your voice since leaving royal life. Do you feel fully free now?" Meghan's smile returned, polished. "I feel aligned with my truth." Greg nodded slowly. "That's very brand consistent." A few people in the audience laughed louder at that than expected. Meghan's eyes hardened. "What do you mean by that?" she asked. Greg shrugged. "Nothing negative. Just that every public figure eventually becomes a brand. Some resist it, some accept it, some monetize it." Meghan leaned back slightly. "You say that as if it's immoral." "No," Greg replied. "I say it as if it's honest." Her lips pressed together for a brief second. "I don't see my life as content," she said. "I see it as purpose." Greg smiled faintly. Those two words live very close to each other in Hollywood. A small wave of applause followed. Meghan exhaled through her nose. "I notice you reduce everything to jokes," she said. And I notice you inflate everything into meaning, Greg replied. The audience reacted, a mix of laughter and quiet oohs. Meghan straightened in her chair now. Meaning is what separates humans from entertainers, she said pointedly. Greg didn't flinch. And yet, entertainers are the ones people keep inviting into their homes every night. That drew stronger laughter. Meghan didn't laugh this time. She studied him. You think this is a game? I think this is a talk show, Greg said. Games require two willing players. Meghan's voice cooled. I didn't come here to be trivialized. And I didn't invite you to be canonized, Greg replied calmly. The silence that followed was brief but noticeable. For the first time, the audience stopped laughing on instinct. Greg leaned back, still casual, still smiling, but his eyes sharpened. All right, he said lightly. Let's talk about something you have chosen to share publicly. Your story, the interviews, the documentaries, the speeches. Do you ever worry that constant retelling turns personal pain into performance? Meghan's jaw tensed. Pain doesn't stop being real. Because it's described, she said. True, Greg replied. But repetition does change how it's perceived. She tilted her head. You sound like you're accusing me of exaggeration. I'm accusing the audience of fatigue, Greg said. A low murmur rolled through the crowd. Meghan's eyes flashed. Fatigue is a luxury for people who weren't the ones harmed. Greg nodded slowly. And certainty is a luxury for people who believe their version is the only one. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The lights hummed. A camera quietly reframed. Meghan broke the silence first. You invited me here under the pretense of conversation, she said. Not cross-examination. Greg's smile remained, but it cooled. And you arrived under the expectation of control, he replied. We're both adjusting. The audience leaned in now. The playful hum of the opening minutes was gone, replaced by a tight, attentive quiet. Greg tapped his desk once. Don't worry, he said lightly. We're still in the friendly part. Meghan met his gaze without smiling. So am I, she said. And for the first time that night, no one laughed, because everyone in the studio could feel it. The smiles were already a mask, and the real conflict hadn't even started yet. The applause cue lit up again, and the audience responded on instinct. But this time the clapping sounded thinner, more cautious, like people weren't sure anymore what they were applauding for. Greg shuffled his cards with exaggerated calm. So far, he said lightly, we've established that you're deeply meaningful, universally misunderstood, and very tired of being discussed. A true modern icon. A few laughs rippled through the room. Meghan did not react. I didn't say I was misunderstood, she replied coolly. I said people choose not to understand. Greg nodded. Intentional misunderstanding. Much darker. She lifted her chin. Much more accurate. Greg smiled as if impressed. Let's talk about the version of your life that millions actually watch, the one on screens. Documentaries, interviews, speeches. Do you ever feel like you're trapped inside your own narrative loop? Meghan answered instantly. No, Greg blinked. That was fast. Because it's a lazy question, she said. It assumes I lack self-awareness. Greg tilted his head. It assumes you repeat yourself a lot. Laughter rose sharply. Meghan's eyes hardened. People repeat themselves when the world refuses to listen, she shot back. Greg leaned back in his chair. Or when the message benefits the speaker. The audience let out a low collective, "Oh." Meghan shifted in her seat. You're trying very hard to frame me as opportunistic, she said. It's transparent. I'm trying very hard to understand the business model, Greg replied. My life is not a business model. Greg raised a finger. Then Hollywood owes you a refund. The audience laughed louder this time. Meghan didn't. She crossed her arms slowly. You're enjoying provoking me. I enjoy dialogue, Greg replied. Provocation is a side effect when honesty shows up uninvited. Meghan inhaled through her nose. Honesty without empathy is just cruelty in nicer packaging. Greg nodded. Empathy without skepticism is a marketing campaign. That line landed hard. A few scattered claps broke out before dying in embarrassed quiet. Greg continued calmly. You've spoken often about escaping a toxic system. Yet your public life since leaving has been almost entirely built around that very system. Do you see the irony? Meghan's voice cooled. You see irony, I see consequence. For what? Greg asked. For survival, she responded sharply. Greg studied her. You're very skilled at turning critique into threat. She smiled without warmth. And you're very skilled at turning trauma into content. The audience reacted audibly. The temperature in the room climbed. Greg lifted his hands slightly, palms open, still casual. I didn't bring it here. You did. Meghan leaned forward, eyes tight. I brought my truth. You turned it into entertainment. And yet, you agreed to appear on a late-night comedy show, Greg replied. That suggests at least partial comfort with entertainment. There's a difference between telling a story and being mocked for it, she snapped. Greg shrugged. Mockery tends to happen when people feel lectured. The crowd murmured. Meghan's jaw clenched. You reduce everything to audience reaction, she said, as if meaning depends on applause. Greg smiled faintly. On this stage, it absolutely does. She stared at him. Then we are very different kinds of people. Greg nodded. No argument there. A brief, thick silence settled. Greg glanced at another card. All right, let's talk about power. You've criticized institutions, hierarchy, control, yet many would say your influence now rivals the very thing you left behind. Meghan scoffed softly. Influence earned is not the same as authority inherited. True, Greg replied, but influence without accountability can look suspiciously similar. Her eyes narrowed. You keep circling that word. Because it keeps circling you, Greg said. The audience reacted again, louder now, laughter mixed with scattered applause. Meghan's irritation was no longer subtle. You're obsessed with accountability, she said. It's almost moral theater for you. Greg spread his hands. Everything on this stage is theater. The question is who's pretending not to know it. Meghan sat back slowly, lips pressed thin. You think I don't know the mechanics of this world. I think you know them very well, Greg replied. That's the problem. A low rumble moved through the crowd. Greg pressed on, voice still measured. You left royal life to escape control, yet your new life is built entirely on controlling the narrative. Do you ever feel trapped by that contradiction? Meghan laughed once sharply. You frame contradiction as weakness. I frame it as evolution. Greg lifted his eyebrows. Evolution usually produces something new. I hear mostly the same story with better lighting. That line drew the strongest reaction yet. Laughter, applause, audible gasps. Meghan's face flushed slightly. You're very comfortable judging from a desk, she said. Let's see how philosophical you are when your entire identity becomes a global punching bag. Greg's smile faded just a fraction. It already is. I just don't call it persecution. Meghan stared at him. You enjoy minimizing what I've experienced. I enjoy questioning what you claim, Greg replied. She leaned forward now, voice sharp. And I'm telling you that you're out of your depth. The room went quiet. Greg held her gaze calmly. Depth isn't measured by outrage, he said. It's measured by how well scrutiny is tolerated. Meghan straightened. Then you should try being scrutinized by the entire world for existing. Greg nodded. You're right. I only host a show watched by millions every night. Practically anonymity. Laughter erupted again, louder than before. Meghan did not laugh at all. Her voice cooled into something steely. You think this is clever? I think it's honest, Greg replied. She shook her head slowly. You're trivializing something that reshaped my life. And you're dramatizing something that reshaped your career, Greg said. The audience's reaction was instant, collective sound, sharp and conflicted. This was no longer banter. Meghan exhaled hard. I didn't come here to be dissected. Greg's tone remained casual, but firm. You came here to be seen. Dissection is a risk of visibility. She looked at him with open irritation now. Every question you ask is loaded, she said. That's because you keep bringing the ammunition, Greg replied. Again, the crowd reacted. Meghan's patience was clearly slipping now, her posture stiff, her tone no longer controlled. A producer's shadow passed briefly across the edge of the stage. The energy in the room had turned unmistakably volatile. Greg looked at her steadily. We've only just started touching the personal layer, he said lightly. Meghan's eyes flashed. Be careful where you step. Greg's smile returned, faint but unmistakable. "I always am," he said, "especially when the ground is this sensitive." The audience leaned forward as one, because now it was obvious to everyone. The conversation had crossed from ideological tension into personal territory. And once there, it wouldn't come back safely. The studio had grown noticeably quieter, not the playful silence of anticipation. This was the tight, uncomfortable quiet of people sensing they were watching something slide out of control. Even the band sat motionless now, instruments idle, waiting. Greg adjusted his glasses and glanced at a new card. "All right," he said lightly, as though nothing had changed. "Let's talk about your life in America." Meghan folded her arms. "We already are," Greg smiled. "I meant the part you don't usually brand as transformation, the day-to-day reality." She gave a short, dismissive laugh. "You think I live in some Hollywood bubble?" "I think most people watching assume you do," Greg replied. "That comes with the zip code." A few laughs scattered through the crowd. Meghan didn't respond. "You've spoken about finding freedom here," Greg continued, "but freedom usually comes with anonymity. You seem to have achieved the opposite." Meghan's smile returned, thin, practiced. "Freedom is internal, not geographical." Greg nodded. "Very on brand again." That drew a mixed reaction, some laughter, some audible groans. Meghan's eyes hardened. "You keep saying that as if it's an insult," she said. "It's an observation," Greg replied. "Everything in your life seems to arrive wrapped in a message." She leaned forward slightly. "That's what happens when people twist your reality for sport." "Or when reality becomes the sport," Greg countered. The audience murmured. Meghan's patience was visibly thinning now. Greg shifted the direction. "Let's talk about your marriage," he said. "You and Harry are among the most discussed couples on the planet. Do you ever feel the public image of your relationship has become louder than the relationship itself?" Meghan let out a sharp breath. "You're implying performance again." "I'm implying pressure," Greg said. "Constant scrutiny changes relationships. Some survive it, some become dependent on it." Meghan scoffed. "You speak as if you understand our dynamic." "I understand visibility," Greg replied. "It distorts everything it touches." She straightened in her chair. "Our marriage is not a case study for your philosophy." Greg shrugged. "Then perhaps stop presenting it as one." The audience reacted audibly now. Hushed, oohs, a few claps. Meghan's eyes flashed. "Harry and I left an entire institution to protect our family," she said sharply. "That's not dependency, that's conviction." "And yet," Greg said evenly, "your family became the central narrative of everything that followed." Meghan's voice tightened. "Because we were forced to defend ourselves." "For how long?" Greg asked. "At what point does defense turn into identity?" That question hit harder than the previous ones. Meghan hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then recovered. "There is no expiration date on truth," she said. Greg nodded. "There is on audience tolerance." A loud reaction rippled through the crowd, this time clearly split. Some applauded, others booed lightly. Meghan's composure slipped into open irritation. "You reduce everything to reaction metrics," she said, "as if humanity can be graphed." Greg smiled faintly. "On television, it usually is." She shook her head slowly, almost pityingly. "That's a deeply limited way to see the world." "And yet, it's the world you keep returning to," Greg replied. The audience leaned in again. Greg glanced briefly at his next card. "Let's talk about your role as a public advocate," he said. "You speak often about change, injustice, empowerment. Do you ever worry that the messenger has become more famous than the message?" Meghan laughed coldly. "You're very good at dressing resentment up as concern." Greg didn't flinch. "I'm very good at asking why influence always seems to orbit your name instead of your causes." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I do this for attention." "I think attention is the currency of the platform you've chosen," he said calmly. Meghan leaned forward now, voice sharper. "You keep talking like I constructed this world. I reacted to it." "Reaction can also be strategy," Greg replied. The audience responded again, louder this time. Applause and low gasps intertwining. Meghan's jaw was tight now, her posture rigid. She shifted tactics. "You've been circling my life relentlessly," she said. "Do you plan to question your own assumptions at any point?" Greg smiled. "Every night. That's why I invite disagreement onto the stage." She tilted her head. "You mistake provocation for courage." "And you mistake offense for depth," Greg replied. A sharp sound escaped from somewhere in the front rows. Meghan's voice cooled again, turning icy. "You think you're deconstructing me," she said. "What you're really doing is revealing your own hostility toward women who refuse to shrink." The audience reacted instantly, some cheering, others protesting. The division was now unmistakable. Greg's tone remained controlled. "I criticize behavior," he said, "not gender. You're not beyond scrutiny because of what you represent." She stared at him coldly. "Every man who questions a woman like this says the same thing. And every powerful person who resents scrutiny says the same defense," Greg replied. The room grew tense again. Greg shifted toward the final layer. "You've spoken often about needing to protect your children," he said. "Do you ever worry about the kind of spotlight they're growing up under now?" Meghan's reaction was instant. "That's off limits," she snapped. Greg raised his hands, slightly, still calm. "Fair. I won't ask about specifics. I'll ask about principle. Do you believe it's possible to raise children in total privacy while building a life in public storytelling?" Meghan's voice dropped into something colder. "You're not nearly as subtle as you think you are." Greg nodded. "Subtlety tends to disappear once patience does." Her eyes locked on his. "You're enjoying testing mine." "I'm gauging it," Greg replied. Meghan leaned back sharply in her chair. "You and I exist in completely different moral universes," she said. "You monetize conflict. I survived it." Greg studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "Survival eventually stops being an explanation and starts becoming a posture." The audience fell silent. Meghan's face flushed faintly. This time, the irritation was impossible to hide. "You think you understand something you only observe from a distance," she said. "I think distance is sometimes what makes patterns visible," Greg replied. The air in the studio felt tight now, heavy. Even the cameramen looked stiff. Greg leaned back, crossing his hands. "We've touched your narrative," he said lightly. "Your marriage, your platform, your public life in America." Meghan met his eyes, openly hostile now. "Then let me be very clear," she said. "I will not be reduced to a case study for your audience." "And I won't allow this stage to be used as a shield against scrutiny," Greg replied calmly. The audience reacted strongly now, divided noise echoing through the studio. Meghan exhaled sharply. "You're pushing this too far." Greg's smile returned, faint and measured. "We're not even at the edge yet." For the first time all night, a visible shadow crossed Meghan's expression, because she knew what that meant. The studio was no longer just tense. It was brittle, like glass stretched too thin. Everyone could feel that the next exchange would decide how the night would end. Greg folded his hands on the desk, his tone suddenly quieter. "Let me ask you something directly," he said. "Not as a comedian, not as a critic, as a host." Meghan leaned back, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Be careful with that shift. It usually precedes moral grandstanding." Greg ignored the jab. "You left one of the most powerful institutions in the world because you said it controlled your voice. Yet everything you do now revolves around controlling the conversation. Do you see how that looks from the outside?" Meghan let out a short, cutting laugh. "You mean from your outside," she said. "From behind a desk, protected by sarcasm?" Greg nodded once. "Yes, from here." She tilted her head, eyes sharp. "Then let me make something clear. I don't owe the outside anything." Greg's voice stayed calm. "No, but when you choose to live in the spotlight, you owe the public honesty." Meghan's smile turned openly contemptuous. "Honesty?" she scoffed. "You confuse interrogation with integrity." "And you confuse offense with immunity," Greg replied. A loud reaction burst from the crowd, half applause, half protests. Meghan's patience finally snapped. "You think you're exposing something tonight?" she said sharply. "All you've exposed is your obsession with controlling a woman you can't dominate with jokes." The studio erupted. Some shouted in support, others gasped in shock. Greg's smile vanished. "No," he said firmly. What I'm exposing is how quickly empowerment turns into contempt when it's challenged. Meghan stood. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound cut through the studio like a knife. "You invited me here to ambush me," she said. "To ridicule, to provoke, to humiliate." Greg rose slowly from his chair, but he didn't raise his voice. "I invited you here for a conversation," he said. "You turned it into a battlefield." Meghan stepped closer to the desk. "You thrive on tearing people apart," she said. "That's your currency." Greg looked directly at her. "And you thrive on lecturing people who no longer applaud," he replied. The crowd exploded again, this time loud, uncontrolled. Producers stood at the edges of the stage, signaling frantically. Meghan pointed at him. "You think this is your victory?" she snapped. Greg shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "This is the moment the show stops being a debate and starts becoming a spectacle." He turned slightly toward the camera. "And I won't run a spectacle based on personal contempt and hostility." Meghan laughed bitterly. "So that's it?" she said. "You preach free speech, then shut it down when it turns on you?" Greg's voice was steady, final. "I shut it down when it turns into disrespect." He met her eyes. "This program cannot continue like this," he said, "and you cannot remain on this stage under these conditions." The studio froze. Meghan stared at him in disbelief. "You're asking me to leave?" she said. Greg nodded once. "Yes," he said. "I am." The audience erupted, boos, applause, shouting all at once. The band sat motionless. Cameras scrambled to hold the shot. Meghan let out a cold laugh. "Of course," she said. "The woman becomes inconvenient, and suddenly the door appears." Greg didn't respond to the rhetoric. "You're welcome to walk off with whatever narrative you need," he said. "But this broadcast ends here, with boundaries." Meghan grabbed her jacket from the chair in one sharp motion. "Enjoy your tiny kingdom," she said. "It runs on mockery and small minds." Greg held her gaze without flinching. "And yet, it still runs on accountability," he replied. Meghan turned toward the audience. "Remember this moment," she said. "This is what happens when you refuse to perform." Mixed reactions roared through the studio as she walked off the stage without looking back. The curtains closed behind her with a heavy finality. Greg remained standing for a moment, breathing slow and controlled. Then he turned back to the desk and looked into the camera. "Well," he said quietly, "that escalated exactly the way it needed to." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "We'll be right back," he added. "If everyone can manage to stay civil for 90 seconds. The music hit. The screen faded to black. If this confrontation stunned you, there are many more waiting to unfold. Like the video if you felt the tension. Subscribe for the next dramatic face-off. Whose side were you on?